There was once a small eating house at the bend of an old road, where the lamps were lit early and the bread was always warm. People came to it tired, they came to it hungry, and on most evenings, no one paid much attention to anyone else. But there was one evening the innkeeper never forgot. It was the kind of gray dusk when the rain cannot decide whether to fall. The door opened, and a man stepped in out of the wet, not young, not old, with the careful walk of someone carrying something precious. He was carrying his mother. Not in his arms, she could still walk, a little. But he held her the way you hold a candle in the wind, one hand at her elbow, his whole body turned toward her, ready to catch what the years had already begun to take. He sat her by the window. He took the wet shawl from her shoulders and hung it near the fire. He ordered the softest things the kitchen had, broth, bread without its crust, something her hands could manage. And then the meal began. Her hands had forgotten how to be still. The spoon trembled on its slow way to her mouth, and the broth ran down her chin. A piece of bread slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. She reached for her cup, and her knuckle caught the rim, and a dark bloom of tea spread out across the white cloth. The room noticed. You know how a room notices. No one says a word, but the talking grows softer. Spoons pause halfway. Eyes flick sideways and then politely away, which is somehow worse than staring. The old woman felt it. Old people always feel it. Her lip began to tremble, and this time it was not from age. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm making such a mess. I'm a foolish old woman." And the son did not hurry. He did not glance at the room. He did not flush with shame or whisper at her to be careful or wave the serving boy over for a cloth. He simply knelt. He gathered the fallen bread from the floor. He wiped her chin with his own napkin, the way she must once have wiped his, a lifetime ago, in a kitchen neither of them could quite remember anymore. "You are not making a mess, Mama," he said softly. "You are having dinner with your son. That is all anyone in this room is doing tonight." He cut her food into smaller pieces. He moved her cup to where her hand could find it without searching. And when more tea spilled, he only smiled and mopped it, and reminded her of all the worst things he had spilled when he was small, and how she had never once stopped loving him for it. The meal took a long time. It took longer than any supper had taken in that house in years. The other guests finished and left. The lamps burned lower. The innkeeper, who had served 10,000 dinners and forgotten nearly all of them, found that he could not look away from this one. The son fed his mother as though there were no clock anywhere in the world, as though the spilled tea were nothing at all, as though the single most important task a grown man could be given on this earth was to make certain his mother never felt ashamed at her own table. When at last she was full and warm and calm, he wiped her hands clean, one finger at a time. He wrapped the dried shawl back around her shoulders. He left coins on the table for the meal, and a few more for the trouble of the cloth. And then he gathered her up again, candle in the wind, and walked her slowly out into the evening. The innkeeper stood at the door as they went. There was one guest still in the far corner, an old man alone, who had watched the whole while over the rim of his cup. As the door clicked shut, he spoke, almost to himself. He left more than the price of the meal. The innkeeper turned. "He paid fairly," he said. "A little extra, even, for the linen." The old man shook his head slowly. "I do not mean the coins." He set his cup down. "I had a son once," he said. "When I grew clumsy, when my own hands began to shake, he could not bear it. He hid me away. He could not stand to be seen feeding the man who had once fed him." He looked at the empty chair by the window, at the faint stains still darkening the cloth. "That young man tonight did not leave a tip," he said. "He left a lesson on every table in this room. And to an old fool like me, he left something I had stopped believing in. Hope. That somewhere, a son still knows how to kneel." The innkeeper never washed that tablecloth. For the rest of his years, he told people the most beautiful thing ever served in his house had not been on any plate. It was a grown man, down on the floor of a public room, gathering bread, telling his mother she was not a burden, and meaning every word. Because the world is full of people who will measure what you leave behind in coins. But the things that truly outlast us are quieter. A patience offered when no one asked for it. A dignity guarded when it would have been so much easier to look away. A son kneeling so that his mother might keep her grace a little while longer. We do not remember people for how neatly they ate. We remember them for who knelt down beside us when we no longer could. And long after the coins are spent and the lamps are dark, that is the only thing still sitting on the table. A meal is paid for with coins, but a person is remembered for far less ordinary things, for the patience shown when no one asked, for the dignity guarded when looking away would have been easier, for the willingness to kneel on a public floor so that someone we love may keep their grace a little longer. The world weighs what we leave behind in money. Heaven, if it weighs anything at all, weighs only this: who knelt down beside us when we no longer could. Honor the ones who fed you, gently, unhurriedly, without once glancing up to see who is watching. That is the whole of the law, and the rest is only commentary spilled on a tablecloth.